Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and children as well. It's a great pleasure for us to have Mr. S Muthiah. Shall we give him a round of applause? For many of you, you would have been reading his articles in the newspaper and so on. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's get started with a word of prayer by our pastor.
Let's thank God for this wonderful time, and let's look to God in prayer. Gracious, loving God, we thank you for the Bible says you are the author, you are the creator. We thank you for this beautiful sanctuary, the building that you had in mind, and you used people who were faithful to obey you, and we are enjoying its benefit. As we listen to the history of it, we want to say thank you, dear Jesus. We thank you for the life of the church and this city, how it has developed. We thank you for dear Mr. Muthiah. Through his writings, many have been encouraged, and we have learned a lot. Pray you would strengthen him even as he makes his presentation today. We love you, we praise you, in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I'd like to introduce our speaker, the first speaker for the day. So, Mr. S Muthiah had his background. You'll be surprised to know that for a person who's a historian and an eminent and prolific writer on the architecture, and he's an engineer, in case you haven't guessed. That's his basic degree. And he has studied in Ceylon, in India, and the US. When you say Ceylon, it's Sri Lanka for those of you who were born much later. After it's called Sri Lanka, it used to be called Ceylon in the past. Started his career with the Times of Ceylon, the very popular newspaper there from 1951 onwards. He was their foreign news editor, then the features editor. He had a number of positions within the newspaper. And then he represented the London News Chronicle and the London Daily Mail in Sri Lanka for a number of years, up to 1968. And in terms of his work, his career, he was between 68 and 90. He was part of the TT Maps and Publications. He's a part of the TTK group, and I believe it's based in Chennai. And he was in charge of this for that entire period of time, 68 to 90. And that was one of the few companies which had a professional cartographic unit in India, the private sector. Otherwise, it was always the public sector. These are the early stages of our publications within India and South India in particular. So he was responsible for a lot of the maps which were published at that point in time, and he supervised the productions and all of their publications. And he retired from there in 1990. But he continued as the director emeritus till 2005. So that was the career in terms of what he did after getting from Ceylon. Now, along the way, his interest, because all of this was more to do with the journalism and so on, his interest in what he does today was blossoming. Right from 1972 onwards, he was contributing to the Gemini News Service and Compass New Features of London. He was already involved with writing articles for various airline and travel magazines and the hotel glossies that we see. So he's been at this for a number of 50 years now, 50, 60 years now. And he, in 1991, edited the Madras Musings. Some of you may be familiar with that. And it's a city fortnightly. And from 1993 to 2013, he was also the consultant editor for the Eve's Touch. And he writes in the Hindu very frequently, once a week, or yeah. And I'm sure all of you, most of you would have read these because it's a very popular newspaper, and we have these very interesting articles which Mr. Muthiah writes, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Now, he's authored 35 different books. So, most of us will find it difficult to fill up pages of even one book. But he's such a prolific and eminent writer as well. He's been a part of a number of different associations, and he's office bearer of the Madras Printers and Lithographic Association and All India Federation of Master Printers, a number of cultural societies as well. I know I'm not able to cover everything for the sake of time, but it's a huge list of accomplishments and memberships, and in terms of providing leadership to many different organizations. In 2002, he was awarded the MBE by the Queen of England for the work on heritage and environment conservation in Chennai. Now, the interesting thing is, 2016, it's kind of a coincidence that the number of years in each of those areas ends with a rounded off figure of 5 years. What I mean to say is this: in 2016, he completed 65 years as a journalist, 55 years as a columnist, 45 years of writings on Chennai, 35 years as an author, 25 years as an editor of Madras Musings. Now, isn't that interesting? So it's a pleasure today to listen to him talk about Christianity in Chennai. And the plan is that he will speak for about 45 minutes, and we'll have a session of Q&A immediately following. Okay? So sit back and relax. Don't cramp. It's well worth it. And of course, we have a good lunch after both the presentations for all of us here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That introduction dates me anyway. Christianity in Chennai. How many here, and please put up your hands, believe that Thomas Didymus, the Thomas who doubted, the apostle of India, lived and died in India? I'm delighted that more than half the audience believed in it. My hand goes up too. The story of Christianity in Chennai begins with Thomas. Those of you who know the story, and it's really ironical that when I speaking to a Christian audience, where all of you all should know the story, don't laugh there. Shanta and I are old friends. I did have a Christian upbringing in the sense that from the time I was 3, I had an Anglo-Indian governess who taught me my 3 R's. I went to Christian schools, Christian colleges, and have a vague idea of Christianity, as vague as I have an idea of Hinduism or Islam. They're all equally vague to me. But what they are, their historical interest. And that is my interest in this whole thing, and not the aspects of Christianity. So that when you ask your question, don't ask me a Christian question. So Thomas, we all know, or have been told, or you believers believe, that he came to Kerala in 52 AD. I think one thing we should start by saying, and I think this is essential to understand, that Christianity is an Asian religion. And this is something all of us tend to forget. Christianity is an Asian religion. It came through in West Asia. It was born in West Asia. And it's only natural that it was spread first in Asia and later in other parts of the world. And I think that's something we have lost track of, the fact that its Asian roots are there. And Thomas, it is believed in 52 AD, and this is a legend which, if you ask me to prove it in a court of law, I'll never be able to prove it, but it's an article of faith. And just as you raised your hands, I raised my hand because I firmly believe it did happen. And I did believe it happened for one very simple reason, that fairly well documented is the fact that Christianity came to Kerala in 180 AD. And even better dated than that is that Christianity in Kerala with Thomas of Cana or Canaan came there by 320 AD. And both records, which used to be in the Alexandria Library at one point in time, spoke of Christianity already being established in Kerala when they came in from West Asia. So I think if you're talking 180 to 20 AD, you're close enough to the beginnings of 52 AD and 72 AD to believe that a legend could really have happened as such. Our friend Thomas spent 8 years in Kerala and then came across, and again there's a beautiful book called I, Thomas, which is a fictional narration, but it's a wonderful narration of how he walked down the desert down to the Yemen, and from Yemen came to the island of Socotra, then from Socotra took ship and came to Kerala, and then after years in Kerala and establishing 7 churches there, walked across to Madurai, spent time in Madurai, and then arrived in Madras in 60 AD. And in Madras, he lived in Madras till 72 AD when he was martyred. How many of you all have followed the trail of Thomas in Madras? How many of you all have done that trail? And I suggest that if you haven't done it, it's something worth doing. So could I have the first picture, please? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me, right? The trail of Thomas starts with the name.
We can't.
Little Mount. How many of you have been to Little Mount? One of the most serene places to sit and meditate. A wonderful place if you want to meditate, but visit that cave and meditate. So the trail starts from Little Mount, where he lived in that cave, according to legend. He would walk to the beach in Mylapore every day to preach, and there was none of the buildings of today that existed. Leave that there, please. Leave that there. And on the way, he would stop at two mango groves. In those mango groves, there are now churches. Descano Church in St. Mary's Road. This old church is now completely hidden by a hideous modern church. really hideous. Much of the new church building is cinematic building as such, and I think the one you find there, going the atmosphere of this church. Then you move on to Last Church. Both these were legendary mango groves where these churches they came up. They were places of rest, and he went to the beach. Then, when he fell out with the local powers, he fled to the mount, and there again is one of the most serene churches that you can find as such, the church on the mount. And it's a church which has a great deal of Armenian influence in it and so on and so forth. But it's a wonderful little church there. And then he was martyred on the beach of San Tome. And later in San Tome, let's pause there a moment. The Nestorian Christians from West Asia, the Arab Christians, if you want to call them that, have been trading with India for centuries. And the Arab Christians or the Nestorian Christians, 8th and 9th and 10th centuries, were regular traders with the great port of Mylapore. Mylapore was a great port in the old days, and they were trading there. And they called that Betuma, the town of Thomas. And there, it was called the town of Thomas because there they allegedly found the grave of Thomas as such, and a very strong belief that it was the grave where, after being martyred on the mount, he was buried on the beach. This story was well known throughout the south for centuries, and when the Portuguese arrived in the 15th century, they arrived around 1498, and by the early 16th century, they heard this story and they came to explore the Mylapore beach and found a tomb there and a small church there over it. And Diego Fernandez, who led the expedition, believed firmly that this was the tomb of Thomas, and the relics of Thomas were removed and then buried, reburied again where the cathedral now is as such. And that is the first cathedral, the black and white picture is the first cathedral that was built there as such. That cathedral was later pulled down, and in the early 19th century, the cathedral of today came here. So this is the Trail of Thomas, which at one time I used to take many people on the walk as such, and I think that it's something which is worth following as such. Right. So from Thomas we came to Thomas's search, and the Portuguese coming to search. And it was effectively the Portuguese who brought Christianity to Madras. The Portuguese arrived in Madras around 1522, and by 1547, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Last Church is the first church the Portuguese are alleged to have built, 1547 as such, the Church of Light. And again, it's a beautiful example of Portuguese church architecture as such. If you went to Brazil, you would find very similar type of churches as such, a reflection of Portuguese influence, church building as such. And again, the curved roof you find in Descano Church, again, is the same type of thing that you find of Portuguese architecture as such. So the Portuguese established Christianity for the first time as such on the coast of Coromandel in Madras in the 1540s or thereabouts as such, as a possible date. And from 1547 onwards, when Fort Santome today would cover an area up to about from the coast to a little eastwards, short of Mylapore Temple. It can really be traced. There is a plan and you can trace the fort, and it comes almost up to All India radio station on one side, and to the other side it comes almost to the river, towards the Adaya River, where Foreshore Estate is. That was called Fort Santome, and which we call Santome today. And within that fort, they built 7 churches. And all 7 churches, I think, still exist today, as such, most of them. 4 of them exist today. Right. And probably the earliest and probably the one which has many significance, next one please, was that one. The Church of Madre de Deus. Many people think Madras got its name because of the name of the church, Madre de Deus. But the Madre de Deus church, again, was built by probably the leading family of Santome at that time, the Madeiros family. The Madeiros family was also known as the Madra family. And most of the fishing pukums on the Coromandel coast at this point were financed by the Madra family. And the Madra family, in fact, even financed the East India Company at a point in time, but they were always broke. So I have always said that my belief is that the name Madras came from Madra, but there are other theories about it as well. But this is probably the best example of the old church has been pulled down and all that is left is this one as such. There was no reason to pull down these old churches, but then you build a cinematic thing behind this and they think you've got a new church. In 1606, the Diocese of Centame was later, the Diocese of Mylapore was established. And in 1616, back on it please. 1610, the black and white cathedral was built, and 1896, the new cathedral was built. The Portuguese established themselves there well and truly. Many of them married locally. Mestizos or Buso Indians were a very common factor. And when Fort St. George was established in 1639, and Fort St. George 3 miles north of Santome grew, many of the Portuguese or the Buso Indians worked in the fort as such. And to meet their demands came the next part of the story. In 1642, they arrived in Madras. A man called Father Ephraim de Nevers, a Capuchin priest of Italian origin, of French origin, but the Capuchins were an Italian order. And de Nevers was on his way to Burma. And Andrew Cogan, who was governor of Madras at that time, and where there was no church and no worship present, and he had this large number of Portuguese who were Catholics working with him, and who also had a large fishing community on the beach just across from the fort working with him as such, and were essential for the shipping to come in and go out. With all of them, the ships used to stand way out at sea, and they had to be brought in by smaller boats, which the fishermen were the people who really ensured this transport. So he wanted some religious consolation for them, and Father de Nevers was given in an Anglican town of Fort St. George permission to build a church, Roman Catholic church. And what do you think they call the church? St. Mary. Long before the Kirk came along, we had a St. Andrews. Long before. 1642, St. Andrews, the Roman Catholic Church, was built in Fort St. George by Father Ephraim Nevers. Fort St. George in 1673. There was what is called the inner fort with the governor's house in the center and an outer fort and the Indian town outside the outer fort. And there, circled there, you will find a shed-like building that is very close to where the tower block has now come up in Fort St. George. The area was called, what later became known as Portuguese Square, but that was St. Andrews, built as a shed. 1642. In 1670s, this is a 1712 map of about the same area. It was made a more modern church, modern looking church, mainly to compete with the church you all were talking about, St. Mary's, which is on the opposite side. From a shed, it became a Pakka church building. Incidentally, those of you who read the Hindu can read all about this tomorrow of St. Andrews. Father de Nevers was a wonderful person. He is one of my heroes. Not only did he build these churches as such, starting from scratch, he allowed the Anglicans of Fort St. George to worship in the church whenever it was not being used, and did not exactly gain the popularity of the Catholics of Portugal or San Tome. He also started what could be possibly the first Western style school in Madras in the church. English children or British children, Indian children, Portuguese children, were all taught the 3 hours in that church. If you want to think of secularism at its finest, I think you need to look at Father de Nevers' example as to what it should be. And I think in that sense, St. Andrews is a proud name to remember. Of course, why did he name it St. Andrews? This is a question which is asked. My own explanation is he was invited to build the church by the governor called Andrew Cogan. So like all good things which still go on, you name things after somebody or other. And so Andrew was named, the church got his name St. Andrews. Now, de Nevers in 1658 was not satisfied with the church being only inside the walls of Fort St. George. There was a population outside Fort St. George which also needed succor. And so in 1658, he built a small church outside Fort St. George, and that was called St. Mary's. That church, which was built on the Portuguese graveyard, has grown into St. Mary's Co-Cathedral of today, and the school he started in the fort became St. Mary's Anglo-Indian Higher Secondary School fort, and would be claimed to be the oldest Catholic schools in the country. So, and Anthony Never's church is also remembered outside the fort as such. St. Mary's in Armenian Street, Georgetown, is now the co-cathedral of the Catholic Church. So today we have the cathedral in San Tome, or the Maila co-cathedral, and we have the co-cathedral in Georgetown called the Mary's Cathedral, and they are known as the co-cathedrals of Madras, and they handle the Madras diocese today together as such. Two different types of congregations. Then we come to we all know that the British presence starts in 1639, and we will talk about the establishment of the first Anglican church in Madras, 1688, St. Mary's in the fort. But before talking about the Anglicans, there's something that we need to look at. Slightly after their time, but to me very significant in the history of Christianity in South India. Next. That's St. Mary's Cathedral and School. Next. That to me is one of the greatest of the Christian people who ever came to India. The man up there is a German, Bartholomew Ziegenbalg. And Ziegenbalg established the first Protestant mission in Asia. It was not the British who established missions. The East India Company banned missionary establishment anywhere in India. We were allowed to begin your priests, the private priests, for your churches. But there was supposed to be no mission activity. Mission activity was left to the Germans. And Ziegenbalg established his mission in Danish territory, Frankabah. The interesting thing, the German missions of Frankabah came out from a place called Halle in Germany. They had been invited by the Danes, who again, like the British, did not want Danish missionaries to come out, but were prepared to have German missionaries come out. And they brought a great deal of the whole lineage of German missionaries came to Frankfurt. Now what is this thing? What to me makes them an important mission contribution? But they did not come to convert, or rather they were supposed to come to convert, but they belonged to the pietist thinking group, and they were seekers of knowledge. And almost every one of these Germans who came out to Halle, to Frankfurt, was a specialist in some subject or another, learned in India. A man called Paul was interested in snakes, somebody else was interested in botanical things. Our friend Bartholomew Ziegenbalg was the greatest collector of Tamil knowledge. And all this stuff is now you can go to Halle in Germany and find all of it there where the mission took place. Virtually all Tamil knowledge was collected, mathematics, science, language, literature, by the German missionaries and sent there. In terms of conversion, their rate was very, very low. In terms of being the first Indologists of great significance, they were the leaders as such. Later, there were a couple of Catholic people who came in who were interested, like Bexy and Nobili and places like that, people like that. But I think these were the real pioneers of the whole concept as such. Which is why when you find on the marina the statue of Bexy, you find Chandler, Caldwell and Pope, and you don't find Ziegenbalg, I think you have one of the greatest submissions ever made thinking on Tamil knowledge as such. So it's not merely, when you looked at these early missionaries who came out, it was not Christianity which was the priority. It was a question of learning about the country they came to as such. And as part of this thing, in 1716, a man who came out from Ziegenbalg was called Johann Grundler, and he came to Madras in 1716 and became the representative of the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. They could not come out themselves, the SPC came because of the East India Company. But the Haller Germans who came to Madras were permitted to become their representatives, and they established themselves firmly in Vepri, your neighbor. And there, Grundler established a school, which then has grown into that school, St. Paul's in Vepri. That is the oldest mission school in Madras, or India as such. There was an honored roll call of these Germans who came to Vepri. Schultz, Fabricius, Gerich, Rottler, each one contributed something or other to India. Fabricius was one of the first to produce a dictionary on Tamil. Rottler was another Tamil scholar. Gerich established the orphanages, but became the civil orphan asylum. Each of them made a significant contribution to Madras from the operating as SPCK representatives, but still very much part of the Haller mission. This school became St. Paul's in 1912. It had been established from 1716. In Vepri too, you find today a faint reflection of what its past used to be. The diocesan press, once one of the biggest printing establishments in Madras, today a tiny little virtual shed as such. But that again came from the establishment of printing in India, for which Ziegler was responsible. Printing in India came out into India with the Portuguese, died out, and completely revived again by Ziegenbalg in Francobar. My interest in Ziegenbalg started because I was a printer, and I consider him the father of Indian printing. Not William Thierry, they all come later. Ziegenbalg is the man who started it. In fact, Thierry went to the German-Danish press in Serampore, and it was with their help that Thierry became famous. That's right. Again, Ziegenbalg's son was at that time in charge of the Danish settlement at Serampore. Now in Vepri, in this church, how many of you know this church? Good. S Muthiah. How many of you all know that is built on a Catholic church? One. It was built on a private church. There were two people with the British in Fort St. George who were totally indebted to. One was Mrs. Medeiros, or the Medeiros family. The other was Koja Petrus Uskan. Koja is a title, who is an Armenian merchant and was the leader of the Armenian community in Madras. Koja Petrus Uskan was an extremely wealthy man due to his trade. The Armenians handled the British handled East India Company handled trade to Europe. The Armenians handled the trade between Yemen on one side and Manila on the other side. And Koja Petrus Uskan originally came from Manila and established himself in Madras as one of the richest people. He made vast contributions to Madras, including the first bridge across the area leading to St. Thomas Mount. And the steps to St. Thomas Mount also come out of what he left for that purpose. In fact, Koja Petrus Uskan has left money still to the trustee of the Madras government to maintain the bridge as well as the steps up to the mount. But Koja Petrus Uskan had this lived in Vetri and had this private church. And there, when 1746, the French took over Madras, and they asked Koja Petrus Uskan to join them. He said, I will never go against the people whose salt I eat, despite their threat to confiscate his property. And he remained true to the British. So that when the British came back to power in 1749 and virtually wiped out any connection with the French, which is mainly Catholic churches at that point in time, Uskan's church was left untouched. And Uskan was allowed to continue living not only in Vetri but in Madras and in the Fort St. George itself. And in Uskan's church, where he's buried, and you find his tombstone still there, and you find most of his Derrick and butlers and all these tombstones in that place as well. Later, the British, when Uskan died, handed over the church to the SPCK, and then Matthias came up. And then the new church was built and so on and so forth. In this Bepari area, there is other areas of Christian interest which are significant. The Lutheran presence also is quite significant here. In 1848 was built the Adekalanathan Lutheran Church, and it had the first Indian Lutheran priest. Halle, Germans and all were Lutherans. And naturally Lutheran worship spread throughout this every area. The first Lutheran school in this area was the ELM Fabricius School in Vetri, which was established in 1849. But I think the most significant place of Lutheran lineage is what was established in the 1950s. Established by a person called Dr. Rajaratnam. The Gurukul Lutheran Theological College and Research Institute. This institute still thrives here and is one of the great major seminaries and study centers for Christianity. And it's not merely of Lutheranism, it teaches all forms of Protestant Christianity there. And we even have Roman Catholic priests coming to study there. This institution is now linked with the first Lutheran seminary, the Lutheran College at Serampur in Calcutta. Srirampur today, Bangalore. Serampur was established in 1818 and became the home of printing with Carian people. But it was the first degree granting institution in India, with degrees being granted on the basis of a charter from the Royal Danish government. and that is still being followed today. And these two colleges work together today in a great deal of harmony as such. And so we come to the British presence. Next, please. Yeah, before the British presence, we just have a word about the Armenians. The Armenians were settled in Madras from the earliest times as such. They were traders, as I said, I'm giving you the picture of the trade. And they established their church first in what is that town just north of the fort, and then out into the Georgetown on Armenian Street. The Armenian settlement was a very major settlement here in terms, not only in trade, but in terms of academic learning as such. How many of you have been to that church? Again, is there a more serene place in Madras that you can go to? It's a wonderful place to go to walk into, and it has a wonderfully kept, and it has a wonderful graveyard, very well kept. And in that graveyard is this tomb of Mr. Shivamonian, who was a priest there. And Shivamonian is responsible for the first Armenian printed material, a newspaper published at Madras before anything was even done in Armenia. And the whole Armenian church and the Armenians connected with Madras had a very strong tradition of publication of material as such. There's a whole volume of material that they published as such. Now the Armenians, the Jews, Portuguese, everybody had access to the fort, St. George. They had greater access than you and I had for it today. In fact, the first municipal council of Madras, the corporation, which is the oldest corporation in the British Commonwealth, established 1688, I think, had 3 Jews, an Armenian, so on and so forth, 3 Indians at that point in time, in the British Council. So there was a great deal more liberalism in the early days than there is today. You can find. We were saying that the British established Fort St. George and then St. Mary's Church was established in 1680. It is the oldest Anglican purpose-built church. It is not the oldest Anglican church in Asia as people would have. Because Anglican churches were established in several British settlements taking over Catholic churches. Classic case is the church of St. Francis Xavier in Cochin, which is a strong Catholic church which has become an Anglican church now. The Dutch started the trend and the British followed the trend also. But this was the first purpose-built church for St. Mary's in the fort. And it is a church full of history. It's a church you can go over and over again to and discover new things every day if you're interested in history. Every building, every statue, every bit of structure has a story to tell. Srina has told a wonderful story in a book of his, Fort St. George, building by building he's gone through. But that book is much short of information in terms of bit by bit of the fort, tomb by tomb, monument by monument. They each have stories to tell. What is that famous one? There's one, on one wall you'll find a monument 2 weeks for it. One stroke. What good days to go through myself. But why we had Protestants between the fort and the fort was not built by a church. It was built by 2 people really, 2 governors, Steinchen Master. It was built by Steinchen Master and other governors, and Yale contributed to it, and it's a contributed to the church. It was not built by any mission as such. As I said, the missionaries came in much later. And in this church, there were a lot of Protestants living outside the church. And there was no sort of church for them. And then there's a church which I have not been able to find, but which Sriram swears he has been to. It's St. Mark's in Georgetown. Built in 1800 by Dr. Kirk, who was the pastor at St. Mary's as such. And that was the first Protestant church built outside. But this is Fort St. George. There is the old place. The regiment always lived inside the fort. And that is St. Mary's today. Next please. And from St. Mary's, there was established in 1715 in St. Mary's a school called the Charity School. And out of the Charity School, St. George's, one-way house, buildings as such. But to me, that is my favorite picture. The chapel of the school, which looks like something straight out of an English postcard. That's all. It's a beautiful little church. But that is the oldest Western style school in India. Something we need to remember is whether we studied in English or Tamil or Hindi or Malayalam, anywhere in the country, we have followed a Western style of education. We have not been able to have an indigenous system of education at all, except in the Veda Sadhas or things like that. All our schools follow Western pattern, and that was the pattern first established in that school. Our friend, the Never School is older than this, but it had a checkered history, and therefore the credit goes to the school. Because between this thing and St. Mary's School, there were large gaps of such. Next, please. And then there began the building of churches outside, with the missionaries coming in by 1804, 1805. The first of the missionaries to come on had a lovely name, William Charles Lovelace. And for years that church, which has now been renovated, was called the Lovelace Church. Then somebody woke up to the name, and today it has become the William Charles Church, with the new look that it has got. Then there came Tucker's Church, which was built by Rottler for the local Tamil congregation, all in Georgetown. And then there came the first of the mission schools. St. Madras Christian College School on Madras Christian College School on what is now NSC Ghost Road, as such. All that has been replaced with the school moving out as such like that, and you get a various things. But that is one church named after the man who started it all, the first Scottish missionary to come here, Anderson, John Anderson. That's it. But what is interesting is that So Anderson came out as a missionary and established Anderson Church and established things. The Kirk itself is not mission established. The Kirk, like St. Mark's, was community established. The community got together. That's what the governor and his council got together for St. Mary's in the Fort. The community in Georgetown got together for St. Mark's. Community in this area, Scots who worked in the fort, which are the Fort St. George before the Scottish Mission got established. It's a difference between MCC, which is mission established, Anderson, and the fort here. So today we have Anderson Kirk, Anderson Church, with a proud heritage. Next please. And next to it, the other side of it, St. George's Cathedral. The cathedral was a mission established cathedral, St. George's. And these are the two main churches here. Wesley Church, which is part of this thing. So, these churches eventually led to today. And I was going to end up with two pictures. Next, please. The formation of the Church of South India. Protestant churches got together, and that was the inauguration ceremony, and that was the first service that was being read in the church in the 1950s. The Church of South India was established long before the Church of North India was established as such, and today it's a very strong institution. But something that we need to look at is a matter of little concern for me. I don't know whether it strikes you, but more and more where we're beginning to look at churches and worship, Christian churches, and there has been an attempt to cinematize the whole thing. If you go to Santo Cathedral and looked at the crypt, which was built recently, it's a completely cinematic rendering of the martyrdom. You're not sure whether it even existed. If you go up the steps of Little Mount, the Stations of the Cross are all cinematized. Church after church you can find, and a lot of Protestant churches also have the same sort of thing which is happening as such. I don't think we are beginning to lose that sanctity which existed and the stateliness which existed with churches at one time. And I'm glad that much of it still exists at St. Andrew's, Kirk. Thank you all very much.